Welcome to the Nourishment Mindset Podcast, your guide to good food, good health, and a good life. And now, here's your host, Nutrition Network advisor and author of the Nourishment Mindset, Dixie Huey.
Happy Transformation Tuesday, y'all, and welcome to or back to the Nourishment Mindset Podcast, where we are on a metabolic mission to help you achieve vitality through real whole foods, straight talk, and the pleasures of the table. Today, I have a fabulous guest, and we will meet him in a little bit. He has been a celebrity chef. He is an author, and he is also an entrepreneur. So I am really excited to have him. But before we dive into our guest, I do want to let you know you're going to be absolutely shocked that red meat, once again, is being demonized in the media. This is a constant barrage of headlines about the evils of red meat. The article that I am going to link in the show notes and that my subscribers on favorfat.substack.com will see is an article in The Guardian with the headline, "Swapping red meat for herring, sardines, and anchovies could save 750,000 lives." Wow. And they talk about how mounting evidence. Yes, we are constantly reminded of this mounting evidence linking red meat with a higher risk of disease. It's all very scary stuff until you peel back the onion and you find out that these are all based on epidemiological studies. There is no randomized controlled trial showing that red meat is unhealthy. This has been going on for many years, and some of my favorite confounding factors would be the bun on the hamburger, the fries that come with the hangover. Yes, right? Freudian slip. The hamburger, or perhaps the Coke or Diet Coke, or the Frosty, or any of the other things that tend to be eaten with meat. So whenever you see one of these headlines, just think to yourself, have we been eating meat for millennia? Did our brains evolve eating meat? Is something maybe else going on here? Just think about that. There is better news, however. Another article that just came out comes to the following conclusion: no observable impact of red and processed meat consumption on coronary artery disease, diabetes, stroke, etc. This is a different kind of study using a Mendelian randomization. This is considered to be much stronger evidence than epidemiological evidence. So this is pretty interesting, right? Except for one thing. Did y'all see this in the media? Was it shouted from the mountaintops? Hell no. No, because these are the things that the media ignores, because it only goes in one direction. So this is going to be linked in favorfat.substack.com's newsletter, as well as in the show notes. So just have that questioning mind whenever you see one of these headlines that is anti-meat, and in my opinion, anti-nutrients. All right, I'm super excited to introduce you to celebrity chef, author, and entrepreneur James Berry, who makes one of my absolute favorite kitchen spices and condiments. So welcome, James.
Thank you for having me, Dixie. It's a pleasure.
Well, this is fun because I was telling you offline that my son is a huge fan of Pluck. He wanted me to tell you how much he enjoys it, but I did admit to you that he ate Pluck for a good year plus before he knew what it really is. So will you tell those of us who may not know? I've talked about Pluck before, but what is Pluck?
Pluck is the organ meats, aka offal, is the gateway to nutrient abundance. Pluck is the gateway to organs. It's probably the easiest and most delicious way to get organ meats into your diet. we basically took 5 freeze-dried powdered organ meats from 100% grass-fed cows. So it's liver, heart, kidney, spleen, and pancreas. And we combine them with organic spices and herbs. So you get Redmond Real Salt, you get onion, garlic, depending on what mix you buy, lemon peel, parsley, thyme. I'm a chef of 20 years, and I really focused on not only making it super easy for anyone to get into their diet, but making sure that it was really flavorful. A lot of seasonings. You'll probably note the first ingredient is salt, and that's because they're mostly salt and a little bit of flavor. This is a lot of flavor and a little bit of salt.
And they're so good. They are awesome. So let's back up a little bit before we get into the history of Pluck. Let's get into the history of you. So I have said this on the Nourishment Mindset before. It's no secret to listeners and viewers on YouTube that I had a horrific, life-threatening eating disorder as a kiddo and wannabe professional ballerina. And one of the things that I learned was the link between nutrients and brain function. So as soon as I was forced to take in nutrients by a prima ballerina with whom I was studying, who said that no more lettuce and mustard lunch, you will eat what I eat, or you will be dismissed from my sought after program. So she got nutrients in me, and then my brain healed and I started to feel good. But there is a difference between not having an eating disorder and really loving food. And it was in my 20 years in the wine industry where I got to dine all over the world with winemakers and media and chefs, where that's where I fell in love with food. So I imagine we must share this. So tell me, how did you fall in love with food?
Yeah, it took me some time as well. I was a very picky eater growing up, very limited. Didn't have my first taco until I was in college. Um, I did have a love of cooking though. It was very funny. I started taking gourmet cooking classes in junior high school. I think around 6th grade, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it, to the point where my mom requested from the school if I could take 2 classes in a day or a week, or however they offered them, and they let me. So I was taking like the daytime class and the after school one. Favorite class, loved it. But what's so funny is I didn't eat the food.
I was
So
gonna
I would make the meals and absolutely love the process of making it. But then I would not eat it unless it was like some kind of sweet thing, or that it felt safe to me, like something I could recognize. Um, and it wasn't until years later that I learned, oh, cooking is kind of my love language. It's how I express to people how I feel for them. And it also wasn't until later when I went to culinary school that I actually kind of worked through my picky eating. I mean, I went to culinary school in I guess it was my late 20s, early 30s maybe. And I was determined to kind of like bust through this ceiling of picky eating. I was so sick of myself. And happily did. I mean, I still am a specific, I'm kind of very specific about what I like and don't like, but I'm not at all as picky as I used to be. And it was going to that culinary school that really opened my eyes to what food is, what it could be. I've never been the type of chef though that really was into the chef culture. I'm not up on who's the trending chef. I really got into it because similar to you, so I grew up with a interesting relationship to food as well. I would say that I also had an eating disorder, just different. I would go without eating for long periods of time and then binge, so I did that kind of thing. And just in general, didn't really understand how to eat and how food affected my health. And so I got into cooking really, really wanting to help people in the way that I felt I got helped. My kind of come to health moment with cooking and food and health really was when I was just out of college. I got a kidney stone. And at that time, it was the most pain I've ever experienced. I was far away from home, so I didn't know many people, and I was in the hospital. I just passed the stone, and I was very fortunate in that I was able to ask the doctor what had just happened, and I was fortunate in that the doctor answered in this way. He said, "Well, what have you been eating or drinking?" So had he not answered it in that way, I don't think I would have connected my health to the food I put in my mouth. And I was in my 20s. And you know, it's such a simplistic idea, but yet I still find people in their 40s and 50s that still don't understand that what you put in your mouth is going to affect your health.
Yes, information for every cell in your body.
Yeah.
So interesting. The picky chef. That reminds me of working in the wine industry. I had this dirty little secret was that I didn't like bubbles, champagne, sparkling, anything. And everyone in the wine industry loves bubbles. So I had to make myself appreciate. That was a New Year's resolution one year. I have a strict policy of only doing New Year's resolutions that are fun. So things like learn how to like bubbles or learn how to like spicy food. So I imagine did you have to keep this picky chef thing a secret for a little while in culinary school?
You know, no one was putting pressure on me, but I definitely kept it a secret how much I was struggling when I was putting something, like if I was putting something in my mouth I'd never tried, I tried to make it look like, oh, I'm excited, you know. So I was definitely covering that part up, but no one was putting pressure on me either way. I mean, you could eat or not eat anything. There was, you know, it's interesting when you go to culinary school because it's not a required program, right? So you would see a lot of kids that were just out of high school, and this is where they were choosing to go. And I was in my, like I said, I was in my early 30s, so I was very like, I'm an adult, I know exactly why I'm here to learn, and this is going to be my career. And so I showed up for everything. I had perfect attendance. The school very much saw that I was a reliable person and capable, that they could throw anything at me and I could handle it. So it was really a real coup, because later on when they would get called for people looking for chefs in LA, I was always at the top of the list, but I was around people who were not taking it seriously, who were excited to be in New York and just kind of sloughing it off. And so all to say, there was really no pressure from anyone. It was really what I was putting on myself.
Well, see, folks, even if you're a picky eater today, there is hope for you, Chef
Oh,
Jake.
Oh, and I have tips and tricks now. I mean, I know, you know, if I'll just go into one, if that's all right. I mean, you know, nowadays I understand better that, well, most picky eating is connected to some kind of fear and, or, you know, or lack of control. So I had a kind of tumultuous childhood in terms of some of the dynamics in my household, and that, you know, the picky eating that my brother and I you know, expressed was really us trying to get grounding in that tumultuous, you know, energy. um and then later on, though, I've learned that, you know, one of the ways into picky eating is through the palate. So our palate is formed when we're in utero, but it continues to develop, and you can clearly like manipulate someone's palate by pulling certain flavors or foods out, as you probably know through the wine industry. And to this day, really, when I'm talking to people and supporting their diets, I'll explain to them, look, in the US, we're very skewed towards salty and sweet, but there's three other flavors. You know, you have the bitter, the sour, and the umami. And so by introducing those three flavors into people's foods gradually, you can start to shift their palate and they'll become more adventurous. And we actually get that feedback from practitioners all the time. And I didn't know this when I created Pluck, but they'll tell me that they're working with parents whose kids might be spectrum, very limited on what they will eat, texture wise, flavor wise. And all the practitioner tells the parent to do is you use Pluck. No, don't change anything about the food, but just use Pluck. And then the parents report back to the practitioner that their kids are now eating more foods. And it's because Pluck is very umami.
I was gonna
And
say
so,
it is like the definition of umami. That's wonderful though that there are practitioners working to heal children and that
oh, yeah.
Pluck's more than a seasoning. My goodness.
Yeah, it's very exciting. I mean, we've gotten amazing feedback. People who, one father wrote to us saying that daughter had been born with a skin issue. They had tried pharmaceuticals, they tried different things, nothing was really working. And then he had heard organ meats can support, skin health. And so she was young, and so he couldn't get capsules in. So he used Pluck, and he said it went away.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
fantastic. I love it. So let's talk about offal. I will admit something here. I am no picky eater, but I have tried and tried to be in the kitchen with heart, brain. The only thing I honestly love, and I do love, is chicken liver mousse when it comes to organ meat. But so how did you get into offal?
Well, so when I was in culinary school, I learned all about nutrition and food. It was a very unique program in that sense, that it wasn't just about how to cook food, but it was also really talking about nutrition. I learned about Weston A. Price then. I learned about, yeah, the importance of organ meats. I learned about macrobiotic. I learned kind of all the different paradigms within the food industry around health. So I knew about it, but I still didn't eat it. And I didn't cook it for my clients. I did do some pâtés every now and then. I did do that, but I didn't really incorporate it until I had kids myself. And then it really set home, because I was like, my why for my own health increased because I want to be around for my kids to age, right? So that became a priority. And then, just like every parent, we just want our kids to be healthy and happy. And so I was very adamant about, okay, how do I get these nutrients into my kids? And ultimately it was how I looked at food. So I'm very aware that anyone could do this. Just do a search on most nutritious foods, and inevitably there'll be some kind of list, and beef liver will be on there, and it will usually be the only food that ticks every nutrient or vitamin off the list. So inevitably they'll be comparing all the different foods, even beef meat, like actual muscle compared to the beef liver. The muscle will tick off most things, but it still won't tick everything off, and the liver will. So it truly is, when you do the research, the most nutrient dense food on the planet. And it's not really just liver. I look at it as the whole animal, because I think about it like, if we're talking about Paleolithic times, if we're talking about when our bodies were truly formed as they are now, tribes would, they would take down maybe one animal, right? And you're a tribe, let's just say, of 21 people. Well, how many livers are there? There's one. How many hearts? There's one. Like, everyone's not getting liver that night. So when we focus on only muscle, or when we focus on only liver, I think we're doing a disservice to the animal. We just killed this animal. Let's honor this animal by using as much of it as we can. But we're also doing a disservice to ourselves, because the whole animal has nutrients in it, not just those parts. And our bodies, while you can see lots of gains by sticking to the same foods all the time, but you will also over time start to get sensitive to foods if you only eat the same ones over and over. So I'm all for whole animal health. That's kind of what I landed on. That's why I put 5 organs in Pluck, not just one. I'm actually even interested in putting more organs. I really kind of landed on this mission of, like, how can I make whole animal health achievable? And so the more I can get access to these parts of the animal that we're not getting access to, for example, you cannot buy brain in the US in a store. Like, you can get it from the farmer directly, and even then it's kind of a hush hush thing, because the government won't let you sell it. And I've heard rumors that it's actually going to pharmaceutical industry, but they'll say it's because of mad cow disease. But mad cow disease is something that we created. It's not something that naturally happens to a cow. It's because when you feed a cow sick animals, which they're not even normally going to eat, but when you put them in stressful situations, they'll eat whatever you give them. And we were feeding them other animals that were sick, and then they got sick. So it's not like the cow is inherently unhealthy. It's unhealthy because of what modern agriculture does. So you can't get brain, but yet, isn't it fascinating that, there is a concept of like supports like. And so the idea is that the part of the animal you're eating is the part that you're getting. And it makes sense on a degree, like heart, for example, is high in CoQ10, which is coenzyme Q10. If you're anyone that's on a heart medication or a supplement, it most likely has CoQ10 because science has kind of identified that that supports heart health or cardiovascular health, right? So it's in beef heart, not so much in the liver. So that's where, they get the idea of like, oh, like supports like, because the organ's going to have the nutrients that support its function, which obviously also supports your organ's function as well. So I find it interesting that dementia and Alzheimer's is at an all-time high. It's never
Absolutely.
been as high as it is now. And and more and more people are getting this horrible disease. And isn't it interesting that we're also experiencing pretty much the last few generations of not eating any brain? And I know I know that there's reasons why dementia and Alzheimer's exists. There's environmental reasons, there's toxicity in some of our foods, whatnot, and they think that's what's contributing. But wouldn't it be interesting if eating brain helped to offset it? So I'm not saying brain's going to solve it, but if we were eating brain, it's possible that it might help offset some of these ailments from modern living. And it is interesting because our grandparents ate them. I mean, if you talk to most people in their 60s, well, I guess more like 70s, 80s, they will tell you that they ate them back in the day. It was either sheep
Once a
brain or
week,
beef.
right? That was
Yeah.
kind of the thing. And that's why for brain, you have to travel outside the country. That's one of my
Yeah.
favorite things to do when I go to countries is eat or at least buy and try to make something that's very challenging to me. I do want to mention, this is not something I've really gotten into on the nourishment mindset, but I talk a lot about because I work as a health coach and helping people with metabolic disease. And of course, diabetes is, an all-time high. The other contributor, and I agree that the lack of organ meats in the diet creates issues with nutrient richness in the body. But the other factor that almost no one talks about is that statins deplete CoQ10, and everyone's on a statin. So
Right.
it's a concerning place to be, but thankfully there are folks like you who are out here educating. And by the way, cheers to Dr. Price. I absolutely love the Weston Price Foundation. I'm a big supporting member.
Yeah, I typically go to those events for anyone that is curious about them. Pluck usually gets a vendor table, so please look them up. It's called Wise Traditions. That's the event, and we're pretty much there every year. So
Oh, good to know. I haven't been to one of the national events, but now that I know you're there, I might come and
yeah, it's in
talk
Florida this
to a
year.
person. Well, I have no excuse because I'm in Florida right now. So
Oh,
I'm
well, there
gonna
you
put that on
go.
my to-do list. Okay, folks, and I'll put that in the show notes as well as my favorfat.substack subscriber email that's going to go out with this. So let's talk cooking with organ meats. Do you do this at home? I mentioned that the chicken liver mousse. The only other thing that I have done successfully, because as you know, I hid Pluck from my son, or at least its true ingredients for a year. I am known to shave beef liver into the hamburger. That is
Yeah.
one of my stealth moves. And I do believe that my son has caught me doing that, but he didn't say anything. So do
Yeah,
you?
it's all about ratios with it. But I do not use organs very much at home, and that's really why I created Pluck, because I do Pluck every meal. Every meal I put it on. So the idea is that yes, you're getting a very concentrated mix of freeze-dried powdered organ meats, but it's also you're getting little amounts opposed to a lot. And I'm a big fan of little movements. I actually am I'm less focused on how much of something I'm doing in a day, and I'm more focused on how often I'm doing it. I believe that the duration of something is really what's going to affect our health, needle more. It's gonna improve our health more. I'm always, I give this as an example of like if you're someone that's struggling with intimacy, right? If you hug someone once a month, is that really going to do anything to support you being more intimate? It will not. But if you embrace someone or lightly touch them once a day, that is going to eventually lead to you being more intimate. You know what I mean? It's like I think in America, we're kind of getting this mindset of all or nothing. And it's honestly, I believe it's what's resulting in that yo-yo dieting. It's like people go way too big, way too fast. It's not sustainable, and then they give up.
Yeah.
And I'm much more interested in what's sustainable. And if it's something that doesn't require a new habit, like we already season our food, all you do is simply switch out what you're using. You use Pluck, and now you're getting the microdosing frequently, which is cumulative effect. So that's what we do in our household. However, when we have used organs, because we do use them every now and then, I always recommend that people start, Pluck is obviously the entry point, but then from there, I would recommend shaving or grating the frozen liver into your ground meats at first, or buying ground meat that already has it mixed in there. Then I normally would recommend that you then start with, if you're going to actually buy an organ, that you start with chicken hearts, because chicken hearts are extremely mild. They're they're small, they're easy to chop up so that you can add them to, let's say, a spaghetti sauce or stew or anything like that. And if you chop them up, no one will even know they're in there. And I treat chicken hearts like I would a mushroom. So if you were putting mushrooms in a sauce, you're not going to put 20 mushrooms. You're going to put 3, 2. You know what I mean? You're not going to do that much. And so that's how I recommend people look at chicken hearts. Beef tongue is another one that's very similar to muscle meat, because that's really what we're dealing with when we're talking about organ meats. We're dealing with texture. We're dealing with like mental association, or just kind of the tricks we play on ourselves around it, and then taste, of course. So what I really focus on when I'm trying to help people ease into organ meats is like, how do I alter all three, one or all three of those? And the grading of the organ meat, that removes as long as you keep the ratio down, you're not going to have the texture. You're just doing small amounts. It's mixed in with something that like ground muscle meat, so you really you're not going to notice much difference. Same with chicken hearts. If you chop them up, the tongue is really cool, because if anyone out there is doing like a Taco Tuesday kind of dinner, you can still do your braised meat, or your slow cooked meat, whatever you're doing. If you're doing like a pork shoulder or something like that, just add the beef tongue in there as it's cooking. The beef tongue needs to either boil or braise for like an hour and a half. And what happens afterwards is that kind of tough skin on the outside peels up, just kind of, you just slice it and it opens up, and inside is a really just delicious muscle that will shred if you've cooked it long enough, or you can chop up. And as long as you mix it with something else, like the pork shoulder or barbacoa or something like that, and it's not the most dominant amount, it's smaller ratio than, let's say, the other meat, no one will know. And it takes on the flavor really well. And then from there, you can kind of start, getting bolder, doing the pâtés. You could start doing liver and onions. You can really expand from there. But I think people need to remember is that we mentioned earlier about the palate, right? You have to adjust your palate. If you're someone who is trying to eat organ meats, forcing yourself to do it, you're probably not going to do it for very long, because anytime we're forcing ourselves to do anything, it's not sustainable. But if you gradually shift your palate to being more open to that umami flavor and that kind of metallic flavor from liver, for example, it's just gradual. But as you gradually do that, you will actually start to crave it. You'll find that your body will want it more often. And then when your body doesn't need it, it will taste different. It will actually taste even more metallic, or just kind of more icky or something like that. It would just, the flavor will feel off to you. And then you don't eat it that week, but you will find that your body will crave it at certain times. For women, most likely right around when you're menstruating, for example, because you're losing blood, right? So you're lower in iron then. Kids are going to crave it as well eventually, but you just got to help them ease into it.
I love the concept of the micro dosing, and I'm sitting here hiding my goofy grin, because what you just described is why my chicken heart dish failed, because it was like 15 or 20 hearts, bless their hearts, in a pan, and just I couldn't do it. So what my key takeaway is keep doing what I'm doing with the sort of grating the beef liver into the hamburger, but I love the ideas you've given. So thank you. That is perfect. I'm going to go back to my Florida farmer, try again with the hearts, but I'm not going to be staring at them in a pan. I'm not ready for that.
Yeah, and you can keep them frozen if you can't use them all, but just parcel them out every now and then. And then what's key is, like I said, the ratio is really important. So if you're doing about a pound of ground meat, I find that it's best to not go over 25%. And I think that's even pushing it for many people. I would say even don't go over 20%. And if you think about that with a ground meat, that's probably about 2 tablespoons of grated liver. It's not that much.
No.
So that's, you don't want to, when you're first initiating into it, maybe just do a tablespoon, and then the next time, and then you'll feed it to your family. No one will notice, and you'll be like, okay, let me try 2 tablespoons this time, and then you do that. But then I wouldn't go too much further beyond that until the family is truly acclimated to the taste and wants it. But it will, if you put too much in there, it will affect the texture. And you have to, like, it's really important to remember, we started this whole podcast talking about picky eating, right? It's like, texture is everything. It's everything. It's what we associate with what we didn't like when we were kids, and those imprints are really deep. And so whenever you're trying to support a picky eater, that's ultimately the first question to ask is, well, whatever the food is that they're picky around, I'll say, well, what was the texture of it when you were first exposed to it? Who cooked it for you? When you have a hard day, what textures do you gravitate towards? A lot of people gravitate towards creamy or
I was gonna say
fluffy.
ice cream. That's
Ice
probably
cream,
what most
right?
Americans would say.
Some gravitate towards crispy, chips and all that, right? So I always try to find that out, because once you learn what they gravitate towards when they are having a hard day, that's their comfort food. So now if you just take the food that they're picky with and you make it fit that texture, they're going to be more, likely to try it. Brussels sprouts is a perfect example. Like if you boil Brussels sprouts, they're mushy and they're pale green, not very attractive, right? But if you toss them in a little bit of, cut them up, toss them in some coconut oil or something like that, roast them in the oven, they become crispy like chips, and they're salty and whatnot. And so give that to someone and they'll be like, wow, this is so good. So
Completely
it's
different experience.
yeah, exactly.
Okay. So we've already talked about how my kiddo loves Pluck. You told me before we got started that part of your mission is helping kids. And it sounds like you've got some great stories of people coming to you and letting you know how Pluck has helped them. So any other fun stories to share?
Well, maybe not fun, but it's really what motivated me to start thinking like this, which was when my 2 daughters were younger. They're about 4 years apart, and we had gone to Canada for a trip, and they both got Shiga toxin, which is a form of E. coli, and it is deadly actually for elderly and young kids. And my oldest at the time, who was probably around 5-ish, something around there, she got through it within a couple of days. And when you have Shiga toxin, you can't hold anything down, like nothing, not even water. It just everything gets regurgitated. And my youngest, though, who was already a very lean child, it lasted for 8 days. Now, when we were in it, I thought after day 4, she was on the mend, and I had to go on a business trip. It was just a 1-day trip, but I left thinking that she was on the mend. I came back and literally she was skin and bones. Like I could see her bones. And it was so scary as a parent. And she just couldn't eat anything. And then finally she could eat something, but it was toast. And we were just like, here we are. My wife's a functional nutritionist. I'm a chef who focuses on health. It's like, we're like, great. Now our kids, because whenever you get sick, the first food you eat is now the only food you'll eat, right? Because it's your safe food. So now she's completely addicted to toast and won't stop eating it. And that's when I was like, gosh, if there was just something I could sprinkle on this toast, something that would help make it a little bit better for her. And that's not where Pluck actually came from, but it's where I started thinking like that, of like, how can I make something that's shelf stable, that's easy to sprinkle or spread on your food, that is a real food, that it's not a laboratory made food, but something real. That's where it all started. But in general, that continues to motivate me. I mean, I think people, I think probably one of the biggest comments, or not comments, I should say criticisms, and it's not even a legitimate criticism, but it's a criticism we get, is people go, well, how much am I really getting? You know, they try to question the vehicle. They say, well, it's a seasoning, I'm not getting much. And my whole point is like, look, this is the gateway. I'm not in any way trying to sell you from eating organ meat straight. Like, I want you to eat whole animal. That's my mission. This is just a gateway for getting there. And the reality is that, you know, it's something like 94% of Americans are nutrient deficient. And I think that number is actually higher now. That's a number from 2015. So I would actually say that it's probably higher now. And we are not calorie deficient though.
Right.
So it's a very important distinction. We're nutrient deficient, but we're eating tons of food. And if anything, we're eating too much food, right? So that's really a testimony of that we're eating the wrong foods. And the majority of Americans are suffering and or limited on what they know, because you only know what you know, right? And most people don't connect what they're eating to their health. So for someone to condemn someone from sprinkling organ meat on the food and enjoying it and saying, well, that's not enough, it's like, that's more than what they were doing.
Right. More than
And
zero.
we cannot, we can't, I just think it's wrong to shame people for their process of how to get healthy. Like, taking small steps is enough. And if anything, it's actually sometimes more effective than someone that just shocks their system and it has nowhere to go. So I'm just a huge fan for like honoring whatever someone's process is in their diet, what they're doing. We all have a reason why why we are where we are, right? You had your eating disorder when you were younger. I had my health issues when I was younger. This got us where we are. But if we didn't have the dignity of that process, we wouldn't be where we are. And so I'm all for the gray area. I don't like black and white situations. I don't believe that there's one way to do something. I believe that we're each bio individuals. What works for you may not work for me. And so I want ways where I can control the amounts of what I'm eating versus someone just giving me a capsule and saying, well, take 6 of these. To me, that's not sustainable, nor is it really work with my body. And it definitely doesn't work with all ages, because most kids can't do capsules. So,
Exactly.
you know what I mean? So I just find it interesting that the one argument against a seasoning with organ meats is actually really more telling of this very American mentality of kind of like go big or go home kind of concept.
This is what I talk about on this show, as well as with clients when it comes to exercise. You know, big exercise says you got to go to a gym and you got to do this and you got to do that, and you know, this many times a week and da, da, da. And that's, you know, hey, I teach fitness classes. That's great for me. But just because someone can't go to the gym for an hour, as you said, micro dosing, whether it be with movement or organs or these incremental changes, because I'm always saying, okay, so take a 5-minute walk around the block a couple of times a day. Guess how much that
Absolutely.
is in a week, in a month, in a year. So yes, that is going to be a theme of the
Absolutely.
show.
Absolutely. I'm always telling people that too. Like if you can't get to exercise, just go for a walk after you eat, 5-15 minutes, but do it daily. Once again, it's about how often you do it. It's not
Yeah,
about how far, it's about how often. And that alone will change someone's life.
truly. I love it. So switching gears big time. You have all these incredible ingredients. I love me Redmond Real Salt. Love all of your grass-fed organ ingredients in Pluck. How is it finding suppliers for this? I can only imagine what a process. And you said New Zealand, so tell us how this actually came to be.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The supply chain in the US really isn't there. Like it's very hard to get whole animal in the US. As I mentioned, you can't even get you can't get brain, you can't get certain glands. Whereas, in New Zealand and Argentina and a few other countries, they actually very much built their economy on whole animal. And so not only do they make a focus of the quality of that 100% grass-fed, New Zealand's very unique in that it's an island. They get green grass year round. They can control certain elements. That doesn't mean they're perfect. They have some farms that are more conventional, but there's a lot of grass-fed regenerative farms there, and that's where most of the supplement companies that are selling capsulated organ meats and ourselves, we're sourcing from the same farms. So once I got tapped into that and that part of the industry, I was able to get more access because here in the US, I spent about 8 months trying to source here in the US, and I could only get as far as spleen. So of the 5 that I use, I was able to get liver, heart, kidney, and spleen. And the spleen was even a hard one, but we were able to find it. Could not find pancreas. And then what's so fascinating is that when we started down the path of like, okay, we found the wet organs, now we have to connect that to the freeze dryer, then to the miller, and that whole process ended up being more expensive than just sourcing from New Zealand. That's how disjointed the sourcing system is here. Now, that's not to say I'm not still working on it. I mean, my goal is to eventually get access to in the US, and where we are working to try to do that, it's just going to take more time and money. But the other than that, I think the industry is really interesting. Like when I was first creating the product, I was trying to find co-packers and places, and that was proving, first of all, very challenging. We couldn't even find places that were USDA that would do a dry product. So, because most USDA facilities are butcher shops, basically, and they're all wet. And when you take a wet organ, it's 100%, and you freeze dry it, where you're left with about 21%. So that tells you how much you lose in water weight and tells you how concentrated freeze-dried powdered organ meats are, first of all. But then you have to find a place that can powder it as well. We couldn't find that. And so we actually had to then look to make the product a dietary supplement, which is really what the industry is set up for. So all the capsules, that's their dietary supplements, which is ironic because organ meat is a food. It's not a supplement, it's a food. So it's disappointing that we don't have that in place. But as I said, we will eventually, and we're trying to support that process. So beyond that, once we dialed those pieces in, though, we were able to create the product that I wanted. It was hard to find someone that was willing to do Redmond Real Salt, ironically, because most people, salt is a very cheap ingredient. And that's why when you buy blends in the grocery store, the first ingredient is salt, because they're using as much of that cheap ingredient as they can so that they can make money on their product. Whereas we are, as I mentioned earlier, we're all about the flavor and the quality. And so salt, for example, is like, I think, the 4th ingredient for our blends. It's onion is first, and then organ meats is second. And the onion meats, the only reason onion is higher is because onion helps to offset that flavor. So it makes it more, palatable for people. But basically, we did find someone to do Redmond Real Salt. We found, when you're looking for seasonings, it's really important to find a reputable seasoning company, one that is working with farmers where they're sustainable, because a lot of farmers are taken advantage of by the industry or they're paid very little. So we were really trying to find like a fair trade kind of situation. Quality, no fumigation if we could, because that's why we chose organic versus conventional, because they fumigate a lot of the spices in the conventional industry, whereas they dry steam them, or steam them and then dry them in the organic one. So that's been our main focus. And then now our focus is really moved towards packaging. We started out in a pouch, mostly because we we're really putting the planet as a focus as well. There's this idea called the triple bottom line, which is where you focus on people, planet, and profit. Because obviously as a business, you have to make sure you're profitable. So we got the people down in terms of, okay, we're getting them this nutrient food, but the planet piece was like, okay, how do we support the planet? Because most of the packaging out there is greenwashing. It's not actually really helpful. They'll say, oh, this is compostable, but it's actually not compostable in your city's compost because it needs a special system, and most cities don't have that. So there's lots of tricks, and like I said, greenwashing, where you can say something's environmental, but it actually really isn't. And I'm trying to figure that piece out. We started out in a pouch. The pouch is 100% recycled plastic. The reason we chose a pouch is because we're shipping our product everywhere. And when you have glass, it's heavier. So that's more fossil fuels to ship your product everywhere. And if we're a direct to consumer company where it's mostly shipping, then fuel is very important because we don't want it to cost a lot to get to us, and we don't want it to cost a lot to get to you. And then the other issue is we didn't want to use glass because if it breaks on the way there, then now we're paying double the fossil fuels to get to you because we have to send it again. And let alone, we also have to get all this paper waste to, to package it with so that it doesn't break. So going the route that we did go meant we didn't have to, protect the package when we mailed it to you. And we literally just put the pouches in a mailer, and then we send them out. So it's as low impact as we could find. But I say we're now dealing with this again because we actually are about to move to shakers, and we're trying to figure out, well,
Really?
we're in the process of it. And so we're trying to figure out, well, what's the best shaker that achieves, the goal of being planetary focused, but also still being fossil, low fossil fuels or low carbon imprint.
And was that based on just demand for people asking for that? I love my little trim pouches. They fit very nicely when they stack up in the pantry.
Oh, well, that's good to hear that. Well, you know what it came from is a lot of times people don't know what it is. So I've been at conferences where, they see the pouches, and the reality is we have an association of what seasonings look like. So we look for them in either a glass or plastic, seasoning shaker. That's just, so the minute you see a shaker, you automatically, your brain goes to, oh, that's a seasoning. Because it's in a bag, we get feedback of like, is that jerky? Like, what is that? And
Tea.
so, yeah, or is it tea? Whatever. And so right away, we
Interesting.
realize that, just by moving it to a shaker, we now change the conversation. So now that it's no longer a conversation of what's in it, or sorry, what is it? They know it's a seasoning. Now it's what's in the seasoning. And that's a more
The
interesting
good stuff.
conversation for
Oh,
us.
I spent 20 years in wine and food marketing, so that is truly interesting to me. It also makes me think of the Provençal markets where the stalls with just the spices in the baskets, that there are no shakers. It's just these
Right.
whole baskets.
Yeah,
So
in that situation, you're making your own. Yeah.
it's a feast for the eyes and the nose and the palate. It's wonderful. Let's switch gears again. Real food reboot.
Yeah.
Naked kitchen. One of
Yeah.
them sounds like a workout, and one of them sounds like a sexy date night. What's going on at your
Well,
house?
technically, I mean, they both lead to each other, right? Um, yeah, I've been a chef for 20 years, and that's kind of how I was. And this Pluck is we're going into our fourth year. So I've been working with Pluck now about 5 years. So 15 of those previous years were me as a chef. And as you mentioned at the top, I am a published cookbook author. And the first book that I had recipes in was called Eat Naked, and that was my wife's book. That's actually how we met. And then we did a follow-up cookbook called the Naked Foods Cookbook. And then since then, I've done other recipes for other people's cookbooks. But the Eat Naked kind of concept is around the idea of not eating ultra processed foods. So like the idea being that they're whole, you know, so Naked was her brand of simplicity around food. So I had a meal delivery service called Wholesome to Go, and that was in LA, and we covered LA County. We were one of the early meal delivery services back in the day. There were only a handful of us, and we were one of the first gluten-free ones. And we had a program that was inspired by my wife called the Sugar Control Detox. And basically what it was a 14-day program where we were pulling out certain foods. So it's an elimination program as well, but we were pulling out alcohol. We were pulling out any sweeteners of any kind. We were also pulling out most fruits. The only ones you could do would be like berries. Well, not all berries, like raspberries, blueberries, and blackberries.
Lower
You
sugar.
couldn't do strawberries because those were too sweet. And we were basically pulled out all other fruit. And then we also pulled out most starches and most carbohydrates, like, you know, grains or anything like that. And so what people got was, you know, really clean protein, some good fat, and then some resistant starch, like vegetables, you know, basically carbohydrates in the form of vegetables. And then sometimes some resistant starches like parsnips or butternut squash, things like that. And in 2 weeks, we would see people not only lose weight, but their palate would change. This goes back to our earlier conversation. So, and after 2 weeks, they would start to taste the way real food tasted. So they would eat a strawberry, for example, after 2 weeks, and they would taste how flavorful and sweet it was, opposed to when you're so kind of, your taste buds are so blasted out and your body's so used to eating sugar, you don't taste, like fruit doesn't taste very sweet. So it was really a life-changing program. I mean, I had people that went into it who were on the verge of type 2 diabetes. They did it for 2 weeks. They went back to their doctor. Their doctor said, "Oh, you're no longer on the verge of type 2 diabetes." And the doctor would say to them, "What did you do?" And the person said, "Well, I changed how I ate." And he said, "No, no, no, that wouldn't work so fast." And he's like, "Okay, I'm going to go find a new doctor."
Love it. A marriage that happened from food, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Food get to the marriage. So I always ask our listeners, our guests, to give me two things in closing. One is, where do we find you? Where do we find Pluck? I know where to find Pluck. It's eatpluck.com. But where else can we find Pluck? Do you have an Instagram, I believe? You probably ever.
Yeah, well, you can definitely find us on social media. Our handle is @eatpluck. Yeah, you can find me at Chef James Berry, but you can also buy Pluck on Amazon. So if you're someone who just gets your stuff from Amazon, we're there. Just look up Oregon Seasoning and you'll find us. But right now, and then we also on our website at eatpluck.com, there's a locations tab, and you can find out where in your state where we might be able to be found, because we're not trying to get into big box just yet, but we have been requested in many smaller health stores or clinics. So there's a bunch of states that you can find us in.
I love that. You know what I recommend for y'all is to get a subscription, and then it will always be at your door before you run out, because that has happened to us.
And I'm excited to report that subscription program is going to become much more robust as well. We're going to be really doing some fun stuff with it, where you get like lots of bonus gifts when you subscribe, things like that. So we're in the process of that. Should be in place by this summer.
All right, y'all, the time is now. You heard it. Get in early. In closing, favorite tableside tradition. So one of my things here at the Nourishment Mindset: real whole food, straight talk, the pleasures of the table. Because there are plenty of books and people talking about the nutrients. For me, given my time in the wine and food industry, you know, I was literally healed tableside and delighted culinarily, and many languages being spoken, just wonderful times. But to me, that's the missing piece of the puzzle, the metabolic puzzle, if you will, is just the act of sitting down to take nourishment, even if solo, right? If we do drive-by fridge, we do drive-throughs, sit down and eat. So that's why I ask people, on the show, what's your favorite tableside tradition? At my house, it's a toast, santé.
Love it. Yeah, I actually, the energy that you put into, like the energy you're in when you're eating is very, very important to me. And I think that it trumps everything, because I think it's really easy to get into the weeds with all the details and the, is it organic? Is it grass fed? Is it this? And a lot of times, even when you go down that path, if the company's lying to you, which many do, you don't know. You could have best intentions and still be eating something that's not in integrity with what you want. And so I think it's even more important about what is your energy when you're eating it. And so being in that parasympathetic state, being in that relaxed, as you said, sitting down, being relaxed, but where that, what helps that process for me is saying grace or a prayer. I think that that is really powerful, and you don't have to be religious to do it. You can just, like, we used to do this Waldorf song at our table where the family would go grab hands, and it was basically a song that was welcoming us or people to our table and thanking the food, starting from being on the vine to then getting to our table. And it was a really quick song, but it was just a way of like getting us sitting, getting us on the same page, and like taking a breath before we start eating and shoveling the food into our mouths, so getting into that kind of relaxed state and place of gratitude.
Yes, there is a reason why all around the world, no matter the religion, the tradition, that there is that pause. And I have never heard anyone explain it as the parasympathetic state, but as a yoga teacher and breath work practitioner, I adore that. That's going to change the way I approach my table tonight, James. So thank you. And we didn't even get into all of the celebrities that you've cooked for. He's got quite a list. Am I allowed to mention one of them?
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so there, y'all, I mean, there's some big names, but I've got to say, out of all the big names, the one that stood out to me the most is John Cusack, because I just love the dude. I hope he's cool in person. He sure is.
What's funny is I never actually met him in person. I cooked for Jeremy Piven as well, his friend, and I did meet Jeremy once or twice, but I never met John. I just would bring the food over to his house and then leave. And I didn't I there's a few back in the day, there were a few of us who kind of we supported each other. So we were private chefs, and if one person was out of town, then you would cook for their client and vice versa. So we were kind of tag teaming, and I was part of his tag team for his chef that he normally had. But I just love that he's someone who's kind of flies under the radar in terms of, like, you don't know a lot about his personal life. You just love his work. And to learn that he cared about his health, I love that. I love that he wanted healthy, clean food, um, and that his health mattered to him. Is just, that to me says everything about his integrity and his talent.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you and your wife for coming together and creating this great family union as well as food union. And we just love Pluck. So y'all, if you haven't already gotten Pluck, because I've already talked about it several times, now's the chance. Get in on the subscription. So thank you, Santé James.
Thank you. Take care, Dixie.
Bye. All right, y'all, we'd never done one of these before, but here is an outtake from something James and I discussed before we got started. My son was really bummed out that he wasn't going to be able to say hello because he loves Pluck.
Oh, that means so much.
He's at his theater class. But
How old is he?
He's 10.
Oh, beautiful. I never get tired of hearing parents tell me that their kids love it. I mean, I made it for my kids as well, and myself, of course, but like, it's just so cool helping everyone, getting these nutrients into our kids, so easily. Like, I love watching my kids eat it. I just love it. And they pour it on too. They just like
Right. So does he. He puts it on everything from caprese salad to his like club sandwich thing that he likes to make with the toothpick. I will admit though, James, I did not tell him what it was for a while.
Okay, but he knows now.
Oh, he knows now. He's
That's hilarious. Yeah, that's great. That's
I said
great.
to him this morning, I said, what do you want me to say to Chef Barry? And he said, just tell him I love Pluck.
That's awesome.
Earlier, I mentioned that I